Okay, so hi everyone, and welcome to this public lecture, Community Associations in Panama's Azuero Peninsula. My name is Jillian Bloomfield, and I'm here with Dr. Eva Guerin, representing the Environmental Leadership and Training Initiative, ELTI, at the Yale School of the Environment, or YSE. This lecture is part of a master's level course at Yale sponsored by the Champion Fund of the Yale Forest School at YSE. And the broader course is called Engaging Landholders and Communities in Conserving and Restoring Tropical Forest Landscapes. So we're really grateful to the Champion Fund and the Yale Forest School for their excitement to bring this lecture to a broader global audience. So today's presentation, the full title being The Role of Community Associations to Scale On-Farm Agroforestry Restoration Practices in Panama's Asuero Peninsula. And it's presented today by our speaker, Jacob Slusser. Jacob is an ELTI affiliate based in Panama. He is a forester by training with over 15 years of experience working in Panama, designing and implementing forest restoration projects in agricultural landscapes. At ELTI, he works to improve the capacity and leadership of rural people to empower them as land stewards and to demonstrate and promote positive land use decisions for future generations. So Jacob, we're so excited to have you here today. Just a couple of notes before we go into Jake's presentation. Because it's a public lecture fitting into a specific seminar, we will not be having a traditional Q&A at the end. Instead, we invite you to think of any questions you have during the session and then write us an email at lt@yale.edu. I'll put that in the chat right now. Write us an email if you have any questions or comments or thoughts on the lecture today. So thank you again for understanding. And with that, Jake, thank you and take it away.
Great. Thank you, Jillian, for the introduction. Thank you, Eva. Thanks for the opportunity. And I just wanted to say before I start that this lecture really composes many years of our program's effort, as well as the efforts of many of our local partners here in Panama. So we'd really like to thank them for their support throughout the years. So let's just get started. As you can see here, the presentation basically has three components. I'll first start talking about the role of community associations in restoration. Then we'll jump into a case study that specifically talks about some of our efforts in the Azuero Peninsula in the Republic of Panama, and then just wrap things up with some final thoughts. So let's get going right about with the first part. Okay, so as we all know, ambitious global forest landscape restoration commitments require very large scale efforts. But so how do you restore at this scale, and better yet, where should efforts be concentrated? Well, if we look to the experts, the greatest opportunities are in mosaic landscapes or agricultural or pastoral lands. And this is especially true in Latin America, as we see here in this middle bar graph. And then if we take a look at the graphic all the way on the right from WRI, restoration in agricultural landscapes via agroforestry practices can really help forest restoration commitments, but they can also really improve economic development and poverty alleviation. And historically, conserving forests in protected areas has created important islands of biodiversity, but restoration in agricultural landscapes are also needed to maintain ecological connectivity. So now with the challenges of climate change, we really need to achieve more resilient landscapes with greater biodiversity connectivity. And to do that, we need to support farmers so that they can restore and conserve forests on their own farms. And so restoration practitioners and policymakers, they understand the importance of conducting forest restoration with farmers in agricultural landscapes, which is why a more holistic approach has been developed. And many of us know this as forest landscape restoration, or FLR, which recognizes the need to restore the entire landscape as a long-term process that both enables the restoration of ecological functionality and enhances human well-being using a variety of land use and diverse plant species. So in these mosaic or agricultural landscapes, as I've mentioned, So smallholder farmers play, an unquestionable role in agricultural production, but also food security, and more generally in the economic development of the region. And again, utilizing FLR as a tool for rural development is really important in Latin America. Again, with this graph, this table, we can see that there's 85 million people living within tropical forest landscapes who depend directly on forests and natural resources, of which 8 million are living in extreme poverty on under $1.25 per day, which is defined by the World Bank. And furthermore, increasing populations and demand for services and products will continue as the region's economy grows. And a major challenge to determine how to meet the increasing food needs of this growing population, without further deforesting and degrading agricultural lands. So if we want to meet global restoration initiatives and improve livelihoods, it's clear we gotta work with people in agricultural landscapes. And in terms of scale, working with individual farmers can be slow and not really achieve the scale that's needed, but rather, working with community associations or organizations, or what's often referred to as forest and farm producer organizations, or FFPOs, can really help provide an avenue for the top-down resources available from these international restoration initiatives. And so forest and farm producer organizations, referred to as as community associations or community-based associations, vary widely in size and institutional form. And in the literature, mainly fall into one of these 5 groups that we have listed here. So farm producer groups or cooperatives, post-processing groups or businesses, community forestry organizations, indigenous organizations, and community natural resource organizations. And the members of these groups are often diverse and have a strong relationship with forests and farms, and they grow and manage and harvest and process a range of natural resource-based goods and services for both home use, for local, national, and even international markets at times. And creating informal and formal producer organizations helps these farmers share knowledge, their experiences, oftentimes helps them to secure tenure and access rights. It improves forest and farm management, can expand markets, build enterprises, increase home and well-being, and protect and manage shared natural resources. And so it's also important to remember that while some of these groups they form organically, no pun intended, mainly have been incentivized by institutional reforms of governments to downsize bureaucracies and really increase decentralization, which is, again, often an obligation from the World Bank or the IMF, and more recently conducted to aid in natural resource management and forest restoration goals, to help further facilitate rural development. And in terms of combating degraded landscapes and enhancing rural livelihoods, evidence has shown that community associations are essential. For example, in Latin America, community organizations manage over 270 million hectares of forest landscapes, and they have this effective role because associations provide organization, collective voice, advocacy power. They also provide a source of indigenous and local knowledge. They provide a point of contact for governments and other organizations, NGOs, to communicate and collaborate directly with the community instead of sort of a multitude of individuals. Associations, when effective, can increase rural economic opportunities and really help to slow youth migrations to urban areas, which often causes a separation from culture and place. And most important, associations can facilitate a multiplier effect for scaling up and achieving multiple social and ecological sustainable development goals. But in reality, there are many challenges to working with community associations, and I think it's important to mention these. So local people, they can be effective landscape stewards, and although their rights to use and own the land and the resources on which they depend are often unclear or maybe insecure. And associations sometimes, they operate in relative isolation in remote areas with poor infrastructure, have limited access to markets, or business development, financial services, as well as, general limited capacity or technical knowledge and sources, for information due to that isolation. They're frequently neglected by governments and potentially suspicious of outside organizations, depending on where you are in Latin America. And then, there's also the issue of different cultural and historical perspectives of land use, which can, really conflict with, sustainable land use or conservation goals, especially from outside organizations who have a, completely different view of what conservation or restoration is. And then finally, probably the most obvious one, the social, political, and economic conflicts within different, ethnic or social groups, families, et cetera. These can also be very big barriers to working with community associations. And so this is why that there's, really are key methods for engaging with community associations so that interventions are, beneficial for all stakeholders. So for example, it's really important to clearly understand that political, ecological context and how different variables will play a role. But also, how interventions need to integrate local knowledge and support traditional livelihoods and not just to come in and replace those traditional livelihoods. It's also important that the benefits must exceed the costs in order to really garner, public support and confidence with interventions. And that the benefits and cost must be evenly distributed, and that the most vulnerable people really need to be a priority in terms of being protected and helped. And then finally, an inclusive participatory process is really needed so that local people have a high level of autonomy in adapting or defining their own management and solutions, right? So now let's switch gears a little bit and start looking at the actual case study. So thinking about community associations, they are rather common in rural Panama, although unfortunately becoming less so as rural areas become more developed. People start to work outside the community, have outside incomes, rely less upon their neighbors and community as they would have more in the past. And associations are often, stronger in isolated areas. And while some of the oldest farmer cooperatives focus on coffee, cacao, and livestock here in Panama, the most common are rural aqueduct committees who oversee a community's drinking water or their, local natural resource. And the legal process to form agricultural and environmental associations here in Panama, this is facilitated by the Ministry of the Environment and Agriculture, and often they conduct workshops to help communities conduct the process because the ministry needs to implement projects in rural areas. So having a legally established association helps the ministry delegate project funds and responsibilities directly to the community. So let's talk now specifically about the region of this case study, which is the Azuero Peninsula, which is circled here in red. It's where most of the tropical dry forest ecosystem in Panama is located, and the tropical dry forest ecosystem, also the most threatened ecosystem in the neotropics. And unfortunately, this region, it suffers from rather severe degradation, as you can see from this forest cover map. Yellow means agricultural land use, green means forests, so not a lot of green pixels on there. And this is really just the consequence of centuries of deforestation for agriculture and conventional livestock production. And so, what we find today in the Azuero is really a highly fragmented agricultural mosaic landscape with a mixture of cattle pasture, crops, patches of secondary, dry tropical forest. In general, as I mentioned before, has very low forest cover, and it's one of the four most degraded regions of Panama. And then the issue with this is that compounding, the degraded landscape or these prolonged, 4 to 5 to 6 month annual droughts and irregular rainfall, making it, extremely vulnerable, to climate change and really negatively affecting local livelihoods. It's just, really impossible to know what the weather's going to do and how to plant your crops. And so, many of the news articles, local news articles, as well as international articles, have highlighted, for decades of deforestation and unsustainable land use, in the Asuero really have degraded the integrity of ecosystem services, especially in terms of soil and water, and again, are consequently threatening, the traditional livelihoods of the people of this region. But it's interesting though, because you would think right away, well, things have to change. Well, to be honest, like landowners in the Asuero continue to raise cattle, raise cattle using these sort of conventional approaches, and this is because ranching is so deeply rooted in the region's agrarian economy and folkloric traditions. You really can't separate them, and it's been part of the region's legacy for over 500 years now. And so that's why, forest restoration strategies must complement and support traditional livelihood practices rather than try to replace them. That is just essential. So, I pose a question to all of you, what FLR, a restoration strategy can be utilized to restore forests and enhance rural livelihoods and agricultural landscapes of the Asuero? And part of the answer is you've already seen in the title, these agroforestry systems. And the one, that we have here, this example here is through civil pastoral systems, which essentially integrate trees and shrubs into cattle pastures, basically to improve ecosystem function and livestock productivity. They're extremely effective. They're scientifically proven, finally, after years of applied experiences. And they're extremely effective because these systems can not only conserve biodiversity, but they do this while enhancing traditional cattle ranching livelihoods. So the top of this slide illustrates how trees and shrubs are integrated using intensive civil pastoral systems, in contrast to the use of monocultures of just one type of pasture grass in conventional ranching, as you see here on the bottom of the slide. And conventional systems have, obviously very low biodiversity and can only support about, one head of, or one cow per hectare, while civil pastoral systems, have much higher biodiversity and can maintain anywhere from 3 to 5 heads of cattle per hectare. So, while civil pastoral systems are highlighted as a sound, beneficial approach, these practices and appropriate technologies just aren't magically adopted by local producers overnight. But I'm hoping, in the next series of slides, I want to illustrate, an effective approach that we've used to sort of increase the awareness and adoption of these types of practices. So now that we understand, the region, the Asuero, the problems that it faces, this basically environmental crisis it's facing, and a potential restoration solution, let's look more deeply into our case study here. So I'll be focusing on the Association of Livestock and Agro-Civil Pastoral Producers of Petitsie, known as APASPE. They're a group of small farmers from the southern Asuero that conduct, basically sustainable ranching activities and have closely worked with ELTI over the past decade. And the history of this association really begins with the socio-ecological research conducted by Dr. Eva Guerin during her postdoc on the native species reforestation project, or known here in Panama as PRORENA. They're on-farm trials, and again, PRORENA was another Yale initiative in Panama that predated ELTI, and her research really disproved the stereotypes that many people had concerning ranchers from this region, not seeing any value in the trees, and therefore that's why they cut them all down and removed them from the landscape. But it was interesting because what her research really found was that ranchers and farmers from this region had an incredible knowledge of trees, were aware of the degraded ecosystem services and were actually very interested in conducting forest restoration practices, that benefited their livelihoods as ranchers. So, for example, they weren't interested, so much as converting their farms into timber lots or timber plantations. But what they did want to do was they wanted to plant trees that would help their livestock production. So fruit and fodder, shade, trees or trees that would help conserve water or soil that would benefit them as ranchers. And so based on that information and to support these farmers interested in integrating trees into their farms, what ELTI did is that we offered one of our first forest restoration courses that we ever conducted in the Asuero way back in 2009. And from that course, a small group of the participants, were really enthusiastic about implementing civil pastoral systems in their farms, and therefore requested our assistance to obtain project funding. And so between 2010 and 2013, as we can see here from the timeline, ELTI worked directly with APASPE to form their own legally recognized association. So they didn't have this formed when we first started working with them. So we helped them obtain that status, go through that whole process, but then also to obtain multiple grants from the GEF Small Grants Program, which is one of the few international donors that provided funding for these types of projects at that time. And then to start implementing these civil pastoral model farms. And it's important to note that establishing a legally recognized community association really is essential for applying, for local and international restoration grants and projects. It's just really hard to get any funding without that type of entity. And while there is, a long story that discusses, the support that ELTI provided for APASPE, what I really want to focus on for this presentation is the time after they implemented their model civil pastoral farms and other restoration activities that they also did in their community. So here again, looking at the timeline, in 2014, APASPE members were trained as trainers so they could develop the skills to articulate and disseminate their experiences and knowledge to a much more far-reaching audience in order to really ramp up the restoration capacity efforts that the ELTI as an organization was facilitating in the Asuero region. And so in 2015, they began serving as co-facilitators of ELTI courses and have shared their model farms and knowledge with thousands of people, which we're going to be discussing later here in this presentation. But first, the big question is how does a community association like APASPE go from establishing productive civil pastoral model farms that illustrate effective restoration strategies into disseminating this information and inspiring a much broader or wider audience, because from our perspective it's great that as an association they've shown on their farms that restoration works, have that example, but it's also it really presents an incredible opportunity to empower local people to create and spread a grassroots restoration movement, which would be much more powerful and longer lasting or sustainable approach to restoration than always relying on outside organizations and NGOs. So ELTI's goal with APASPE was to empower their members to create a community-based center of knowledge so that they could make more informed decisions on their farms and then to really disseminate that information to others and essentially to be the agent of change in the landscape. And so to achieve this goal with APASPE, ELTI utilized a training of trainers model containing 3 components, as you can see here. First, capacity development. So in order to equip the members with enhanced restoration skills, as well as continued leadership development, and to really help the members gain more confidence, and as well as the motivation and experience to develop and manage their own association. But then third, and through long-term trainer development, members the apostrophe members really learned effective methods of communication and how to teach others using experimental techniques, training materials, and really the network of their model farms, as farmers, but also as confident and motivated leaders. And so what I want to focus now on is describing the approach that ELTI took to develop apostrophe members into these, effective trainers that I've mentioned. So, first we recognize that farmers are incredibly intelligent people with a wealth of knowledge and really just years of trial and error experience in an applied setting. They're oftentimes scientists in their own right, doing experiments on a daily basis. But also, farmers are, they're often already sort of, exceptional communicators, and their use of hands-on demonstrations, stories, anecdotes, jokes, really gives them advanced level of being prepared, especially when training other farmers. And so ELTI's approach encouraged, the apostrophe members to be themselves, to tell the story of their farm, describing how it was historically managed, the motivations to seek alternatives such as restoration, but also we really, emphasized that for them to focus on, the initial doubts they had, and especially the challenges and failures they experienced, and explaining, the process of overcoming them, because I think that it really works with other farmers, to understand what they went through, and to see that it's possible. But also, and I hope everyone had lunch, otherwise it's probably gonna make you hungry. Members were trained how to introduce different restoration themes, and explain these technical and scientific information in a more practical manner, but in, obviously local language, and actually, how to demonstrate these restoration techniques in the field. And we really encourage them to use analogies to describe, different systems or biological processes. And so, for example, here, to describe the importance of using diverse, nutritional forage shrub and tree species in a silvopastoral system, apostrophe members use the analogy of a traditional meal of, chicken, beans, and rice, relating each food with a specific plant species in their model silvopastoral farm that, provides the equivalent dietary nutrition, for a more healthy and productive livestock. It seems sort of silly, but these analogies were extremely effective. And hopefully you did eat already. Otherwise, this might disagree with you a little bit here. But members, I would say, we're very quick to share the increase in cattle stocking rates, or the increase in milk production as a result of establishing these systems, these silvopastoral systems. But they were trained to discuss the importance of conserving functional biodiversity, which essentially provides economic benefits through savings, because you're not having to pay for an ecosystem service that is degraded. If you have nitrogen fixing trees on your farm, you're not going to have to keep buying fertilizer and dump it all over your pastures, because those nitrogen fixing species are pumping nitrogen into your soil day and night. And so, for example, here, like, apostrophe members don't, they don't describe soil improvements by discussing, the macronutrient levels, NPK, percentages, but they rather focus on the presence of certain insects, such as dung beetles, which you see in this photo, which are extremely important to facilitate manure decomposition, avoid pests, and in general, maintain soil health. And so, also, instead of calling soil insects, soil, macrofauna, or some scientific term, soil insects are referred to as soil engineers, and these engineers are responsible for creating and managing and maintaining green infrastructure. Except that these engineers work for free and provide, benefits on farm, as long as they're provided the habitat through, increased, forest cover in the pastures. And so, we really encourage members to conduct experimental restoration techniques, and many of them were already doing this on their own. But the idea of just utilizing their farms like living laboratories. So, conducting different experiments, really allowed the members to try different approaches, evaluate them, and most importantly, like, tailor fit the restoration practices to their own objectives and farm context, instead of just that they have to implement, a certain recipe of restoration. We always want to get away from that type of approach. And so, for example, farmers often want to intercrop traditional food crops within native tree reforestation plots or timber plantations, which isn't traditionally conducted in conventional restoration or reforestation practices, but it does help to meet farmer food security, while commonly resulting in higher tree growth. And connecting, this is also the important component about students, is that connecting students and researchers with farmers also helps to foster this participatory research, where they assist farmers to monitor and analyze the results of different practices and provide useful information, for more adaptive management. And so model farms are a key tool for APOSPE members to demonstrate their restoration strategies in an outdoor classroom, which is an extremely applied environment, which is what you need for adult learning. And the experience of establishing and managing one, provides that rich experience and insight to overcome challenges, and really highlights the best practices that, as we see in this photo, visiting farmers, can see and then replicate on their own farms. So, the development of visuals like this, this farm map, really assists to not, just to frame the introduction of a visit, facilitate the tour of the farm, or to highlight, results from experiments. And having APOSPE members, shadow trainers was a very effective way to teach facilitator skills, because it provided them, the opportunity to see their role as a future trainer, by observing the methods, of an actual trainer. And the experience really demonstrates, teaching methods that can adapt and utilize. They can adapt and utilize when receiving visitors. And the method is to, in theory, to progressively give more training responsibility so that they, slowly transition into a lead trainer, to facilitate visits in their own model farm. And it's important to note that, our approach with APOSPE really stressed providing extra mentoring and assistance to underrepresented people, or minorities, such as, women and youth in agriculture, and especially ranching, because they really face additional changes or challenges to become effective trainers. And this focus really is important because, underrepresented trainers are better equipped to understand the multiple challenges of more marginalized people. And, likewise, underrepresented people are more likely to connect and learn from a trainer that they can identify with. And this really helps to overcome, racial, gender, or ageist stereotypes or barriers. And then, so beyond utilizing model farms for transmitting knowledge and teaching, teaching APOSPE members how to, to develop educational materials, such as PowerPoint presentations, as you see here in this photo, pamphlets, case studies, other information, that's really excellent for, sort of this wide dissemination, beyond, the borders of a model farm. And the prevalence of smartphones now and social media has provided an extremely cheap and effective way for people to share information to wide audiences, beyond their own community. And APOSPE members were encouraged to utilize technology and basic training, in many cases was conducted, for example, on how to use a smartphone to capture, images, especially of their farm, and also to video and monitor their projects, to post, on their social media accounts. And also things, like free chat services like WhatsApp, really also help to disseminate information, coordinate activities with farmer associations that all, help in this, in these efforts to scale up restoration activities. And so now that you have a better idea of how APOSPE members develop leadership skills, as trainers, let's take a closer look at the specific role and impacts that they've had scaling up restoration efforts in Panama in the past 5 years. So I'll start with the local level and describe their initial efforts, as trainers and basically for other farmers and children from their community. And so, Apaspe began sharing their experiences with their neighbors and local farmers who were interested in learning about the systems that they'd established. And so, Apaspe facilitated multiple ecological fairs for local school children with the help or with the goal of illustrating how civil pastoral systems are a more ecological and sustainable livestock system. And this is mainly through its sustainability and increased productivity, but also to really demonstrate this idea of new hope and opportunity for traditional livelihoods. But at the same time, while healing and caring for a degraded landscape or a degraded farm that eventually their children and grandchildren are going to be inheriting. So I just want to note that these events were key, not only just to share about what they were doing on farm with other people that were interested, but really to really help share this information with the greater community and especially farmers who weren't part of the association, and to dispel rumors and about their project, and to avoid really a lot of negative gossip that originally had plagued their initial efforts. So it was really important that they had this type of community outreach and community or communication strategy. Okay, so next let's move on to the regional level, where Apaspe members were moved beyond their community and into other regions of the province. So first, I'll talk about with other provincial farmer associations, and then with producers from a multi-province watershed. So within the region, other farmers were interested to see the results of the Apaspe project, which essentially was the first sustainable ranching project in the Asuero at the time. And so field visits were facilitated for 4 provincial farmer associations, and this was conducted with our help, as well as the help of other regional partners. And so one of the groups that you can see here circled, the Ecological Producers Association, known as SAVIM, is it's an example of an early multiplier effect. So SAVIM was they were so inspired by Apaspe's efforts that they requested Apaspe's help to develop a grant application for their own sustainable ranching project, which they ended up winning from the GEF Small Grants Program in 2016, and then they just won a second grant here a couple of years ago in 2019. And after establishing 3 model farms and participating in LT's Trainer of Trainers model, they are also training others, farmers, extension agents in their own model farms, in a different region of the Asuero. And in fact, along with Apaspe, SAVIM is currently training a new group of cattle ranchers located in the most important and yet severely degraded watershed of the Asuero, the La Villa River watershed. And the project, which is funded by the Conservation Food and Health Foundation, is currently helping to train 30 extension agents and farmers, establish 10 more model civil pastoral farms, which will be essentially the first in the watershed. And that the idea is that these farmers will also be trained as trainers and will be able to help scale up civil pastoral systems and efforts throughout this watershed. Okay, so now let's move to the beyond the Asuero and into the national level, and I'll describe 3 examples of Apaspe's training, different land use decision makers. So first, I'll talk about farmers from the Sustainable Ranching Project, which is in the Santa Maria River watershed. Second, I'll talk about indigenous farmers from the Darien province. And then I'll wrap it up with some officials from Panama's Ministry of the Environment who are responsible for implementing international forest restoration commitments. And so moving north of the Asuero, one of Apaspe's, one of the greatest achievements was helping to train 120 farmers from the Santa Maria River watershed. And these farmers are currently participating in the largest sustainable ranching project ever executed in Panama. We're talking about 600 hectares of civil pastoral systems on 120 model farms. And the participants of this project they visited Paspe model farms and learned about the challenges and best practices of implementing civil pastoral systems. And so, this on-farm training and conversations with the Paspe members really inspired the participants of this project that that sustainable ranching alternatives are possible. And this is essential for large, restoration or agroforestry or civil pastoral projects, to win public support and confidence, and just to really start off on the right foot when they see, peers from their own region doing this and being successful at it. So next, let's jump to the Darien province, which is the eastern side of Panama, which borders Colombia. So here, the Peregrine Fund, which works with the Embera-Wunan indigenous people from the Darien and Comarcas, basically to conserve harpy eagle habitat. But they also wanted to train, some of these farmers on more sustainable agricultural production and restoration practices. So 50 farmers and extension agents, were trained on agroforestry strategies by Paspe members at their model farms. And this was an important exchange because the Darien suffers from land conflict issues between cattle ranchers and indigenous people who have very different livelihoods. And a Paspe demonstrating sustainable ranching really gives the hope that people in the Darien can live in the same landscape more harmoniously. And so now through a GEF small grant project, these indigenous associations have established their own native species nurseries and agroforestry systems. And so finally, on a national scale, Paspe trained, important decision makers at the ministry level. So Paspe co-facilitated a week-long course on their farms for 15 regional officials from Panama's Ministry of the Environment. And these were people who were responsible for implementing Panama's 1 million hectare reforestation project, which is part of the, Panama's bond challenge restoration commitment. And the key thing here is that, Paspe's model farms, they really demonstrated the range of species as well as restoration activities that can be successfully adopted by local landowners to really enhance their livelihoods. And which is important because it shows that, instead of cattle ranching being historically at odds with, conservation, it can be part of the solution. It can be part of the ministry's restoration activities, part of their toolbox. So since 2015, Paspe members have co-facilitated over, 30 training courses, received over 3,000 visitors on their farms, and which I got to know, 400 of which were regional and national decision makers. And this map really illustrates the scale that one, empowered community association can have in disseminating, training, and inspiring others on restoration practices. And this highlights the importance of developing centers, centers of local knowledge, who can catalyze a restoration, multiplier effect that will endure as farmers continue to raise livestock and look for, more sustainable alternatives. And as a result, of this type of scaling out from a bottom-up grassroots approach, FLR activities, agroforestry activities, that are linked with global restoration initiatives, have a much better potential of being implemented, and the connectivity across the landscape will have a greater chance to increase as more decision makers, will have the knowledge, skills, and inspiration to embark on forest restoration activities. So now, just to wrap up with some final thoughts. So first, prioritizing community associations and forest restoration efforts provides a promising option, to align global agendas for climate mitigation, conservation, environmental justice, and enhanced livelihoods, but via, sustainable rural development. Increasing restoration knowledge and skills of people across the landscape, can help to decentralize, top-down restoration initiatives and give more ownership of projects at the local level, and help to foster, the development of local people and groups as agents of change. But to really to make this happen, and this is key, is that training and leadership development should not be seen as this one-time activity. but rather as a process of continually building and developing the knowledge and skill sets of community associations, especially as communicators, community promoters and trainers. And this is something that, I've highlighted very clearly in this presentation. And then finally, empowering community associations, like we've seen in this case study, can help to establish this legacy of local expertise and promote a multiplier effect that occurs throughout the landscape long after restoration, organizations, NGOs, and these interventions have finished, because, essentially the knowledge has become woven, into the landscape at that point. And now just to wrap up, if you're more interested in learning about this case study, you can check out these 2 peer-reviewed articles that we have. They're open access, available through the European Tropical Forest Research Network, available at etfrn.org. And with that, I want to thank everyone and hope you all have a wonderful day.
Great. Thank you so much, Jacob. And thank you also to the Champion Fund of the Yale Forest School for the support in helping us make this a public lecture. So it's a really inspiring theme, and neat to see how things have evolved and all the important lessons coming out of Panama. And it's so wonderful to be able to share this with a broad audience, to be able to then relate those to the many different contexts happening throughout the world. As a reminder, you can write to ELTI or LT at yale.edu with any specific questions related to this talk today, or the themes that you're thinking of related that has come up during this talk. And with that, Jake, I'd like to share my screen to show just a couple other learning opportunities. Okay, here we go. A reminder that this talk is recorded, and it will be posted to LT's YouTube page. And I'll put that again in the chat, and to let you guys know that we have a lot of materials you can check out. A lot of our past webinars, the webinar last week, the series that we've had, different videos. We welcome you to check out our YouTube page and check out different opportunities to learn more that way. Also, for those of you who speak Spanish or are connected to people who do, we have a short course coming up on civil pastoral systems. So Jake mentioned all of these important ways in which civil pastoral systems can serve to preserve local cultures and livelihoods, while also helping improve the environment. And so this course is a really neat way for people to learn more about those systems in particular. And so what I'll do right now is I'll put in the chat the information about this course, which so first I'll put the YouTube link, which is coming up so that you can check out all the recordings, and then the information to learn more about this course in particular. And lastly, we just want to thank you all for showing up and for your time and attention. It's great to share these experiences with you all. Thank you again to our speaker today. If you have any questions or want to learn more about ELTI, check out our website at elti.yale.edu or email elti or lt@yale.edu. And again, this has been part of the broader seminar on engaging landholders and communities at the Yale School environment. So thank you again for joining us today, and we wish you all the best.
Thank you, everyone. Take care. Cuídense mucho. Saludos.
Bye-bye.